Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Q&A with director and filmmaker Desmond Ovbiagele, whose film The Milkmaid is currently screening as part of the 28th New York African Film Festival. And I'm Ngozi Odita. I'm founder of Africa Next, and we curate spaces and experiences for those passionate about Africa to connect. So hello, Desmond. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Ngozi.
And again, I just wanted to really thank you for this film. I was saying earlier when we were talking, I just really love the film, the story arc. It was visually stunning, but it was an important story that was told very well. And I appreciated it. I loved it. So thank you for giving us the Milkmaid. So the film is about insurgency in the North. And there's kind of like a connotation of what that is. Like, people think of it as it's such this tragic story, which it is, and there's so much, films or documentaries show you all the tragedies that are happening, in northern Nigeria. But for you, like, your approach with the Milkmaid is you have these two sisters, Aisha and Zainab, and they're kidnapped from their village by religious extremists. But rather than kind of depicting them as just these victims who go through all these tragic things, there was more complexity to the story. And you really showed that they were, like, they were powerful, they had agencies, they had their own ideas and opinions. So why did you choose to take that angle of the movie and depict them in that way?
It wasn't a conscious decision on my part that Aisha and Zainab wouldn't be portrayed as victims of the milkmaid. I think that was probably a decision that came out of the research I had done and my personal encounter with the survivor of insurgency, who I encountered in the southern part of the country in Lagos, not far from where I actually live. And having interacted with these couple of women, I mean, the most striking thing about them was that, they had the most horrific stories to tell about where they came from and how many members of their family they had lost. But they were still standing on their 2 feet. They were still, to some extent, smiling. They were upright. They weren't bent over and feeling sorry for themselves. So it was very striking that these women had been through so much, but yet they had found a way to survive. And that wasn't automatic. I mean, they literally had to look for, loopholes in the security apparatus of the people who abducted them in the camp and make their escape. And not just make their escape, make their way all the way down from northern Nigeria to southern Nigeria to seek refuge, from the crisis. So that told me that, the victims, do to some extent have a degree of agency in terms of their fate, in terms of their destiny, and some of them do take their destiny into their own hands, to find a solution out of their dilemma. So that's what we sought to portray with Aisha and Zainab, which is, yes, they have been abducted, they don't have guns, they're not more physically powerful than their abductors, but they still are able to use their wits to find a way to survive in this very, very new and hostile situation in which they find themselves.
I think also a part of it that I saw is, like, even not just with the young women who were kind of the central characters, but even with the soldiers, you were able to, I developed feelings, like I had compassion towards the soldiers' experience. And many people would just be like, they're bad, but you were able to show, like, there's more to this story. You went beneath the surface and you gave the show, you showed a perspective and kind of an angle to what the experience is of a soldier as well. So why was that important to incorporate into the story?
Again, that was a decision to portray them as the research bore out. I mean, it was very interesting, reading the accounts of survivors, of the insurgency, and them talking about how their abductors related to them. And It reminded one that the people who are perpetrators in the insurgency crisis weren't born perpetrators, or born normal human beings who went about their lives playing and laughing and joking, and along the way they got brainwashed into an extremist ideology, but they still retain elements of humanity, and that certainly proved itself when the girls came to very close contact with these people after being abducted. And these people tended to want the girls, despite the fact that they had coerced them to be with them. They wanted them to like them and made efforts to try and make them like them. They wanted romantic relationships rather than master servant, which is probably what some people might think, from reports. But so they actually made attempts to win them over and not necessarily coerce them. Yes, coercion was a part of their ideology, but they tried to buy them expensive things and gifts, even imports of food items from outside the country, from Dubai and such places, jewelry as well. This was the stories that some of the survivors told. So. They have their extremist ideology. They also have human elements and aspirations to them, and we try to show that through some of the insurgent leaders in the Milkmaid, that one of the reasons why their brainwashing and indoctrination is so successful is that they're able to come at their victims from a human point of view, to show them that, hey, we're human beings like yourselves, and we've just discovered these new lights that you also need to be a part of. So it even makes their extremism even more seductive, and unfortunately is also to some extent successful. Given the some of the people who have actually been won over through their ideology and have embarked on either campaigns of killing through military action, or even through suicide bombings.
So you talked about authenticity. So I'm sure many would be like, well, here's this man who's not Muslim, who's not from the north. Like why does he tell this story? So can you also share, like, why did you feel like you were the right person to tell this story, considering that, and to tell the story authentically, considering those things?
I didn't particularly feel that I necessarily was the right person to tell this story. As you may point out, I'm not from the northern part of Nigeria. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a woman, but I'm telling a story that has these elements as very strongly represented in the film. What I did feel was that the right person to tell the story was someone who had the commitment to tell as authentic a story as possible, to justify, the experiences and the trauma that the victims of insurgency experience. So that commitment, I felt whoever was telling such a story needed to have that commitment to authenticity. And then I also felt the person, hopefully, would have the expertise, the skills to be able to tell it in a way that was compelling and was persuasive and was impactful. Now, as to whether I qualify on the second part, that's obviously not for me to say. That's for other people to judge. But for the first part, I certainly did feel that I had the commitment to tell that story as authentically as possible. And that was just simply because of the way I felt about the situation in the northern part of the country, and the fact that very little was being said about it. It certainly wasn't being portrayed through the medium of film. The media reports tended to focus far more on the actions or inactions of the government, of the extremists themselves. There's very little attention being given to the victims, who they were, their backstories, just putting more flesh around who these people are, rather than just how many people died and the number of people who died. So I certainly felt very strongly motivated, to put the lives of the victims of insurgency, before the world. To a certain extent, we're not saying our film, addresses every aspect, of the victims of insurgency, but we certainly did try to portray some of their experiences and what they go through, and in addition to that, also who the extremists are, and how they think and how they relate, to their captives, so that essentially was, my motivation for delving into the Milkmaid. I did try to immerse myself in as much research as I could to ensure that the narrative that came out of that research process was authentic to the characters involved in the setting of the story.
So speaking of stories, let's talk about your story a little bit. You're an investment banker. So how does an investment banker end up getting into film? And then more importantly, like you've done two films and you've done them well. It's one thing to like say I want to be a filmmaker, quite another thing to tell good stories. So what was it like? How did that journey happen? Like, and how did you become a good filmmaker considering that was not your background? That's not what you studied.
I worked as an investment banker for several years. Um, Although I would say there's a difference between working in investment banking and being an investment banker. I think I'm probably still not sure that I was ever fully an investment banker in true sense of the word, in terms of being absolutely dialed in 100% 24/7 to that. I had other aspects of myself and my personality which I was very keen to explore, and I guess at some point after several years in investment banking, I felt that if I didn't take that step to at least explore that side of my personality, then it probably would never happen. So I stepped away from investment banking and sought for a form of personal expression in the creative arts. Perhaps not a total sea change for me, given that my mother happens to be a popular fiction writer in Nigeria, dating back, for the last 40 years or so. But I never did have any inkling that I would, toe that path until, fairly late in my adult life, so to speak. Um, once that happened, I didn't go to film school. What I was inclined to do was just to watch as many films as possible. I enjoyed watching films the same way I enjoyed immersing myself in tons of novels as I was growing up as a youth. I gravitated more towards films, and I just sought to, just soak up, how films are made, dialogue, characterization, storylines, and all that. It was a very informal process, but I think it informed my approach to filmmaking, and sort of, helped me to craft exactly how I want to develop and interpret the stories that I have, in my mind. I started out writing scripts, which is actually my first step into the filmmaking industry, and I wrote several scripts, most of which haven't seen the light of day. But eventually, I latched onto a script which I felt strongly enough about to begin to put the elements of production in place, in terms of financing, in terms of cast, in terms of crew, and that resulted in my first film, rendered to Caesar in 2014. And it took me a number of years to recover from that process, which was it was a bit of a shock to the system. But once I did, then the second story that made me feel just as strong, if not stronger, about was a Milkmaid. That's where we are.
So how was it getting started? Because not going to film school, and I mean, obviously with your mother being a writer, there's that, but you still had to establish relationships. That so much of that is involved in being able to not just make a film, but get your film out there, get it into film festivals. So what was that process like in being able to accomplish that without coming from a film background?
One thing I certainly would say I benefited from working as an investment banker was obviously the training and the discipline and the tools that professional career had provided to me in terms of being able to articulate proposals and ideas and concepts in a lucid form, to be consumed by third parties. So you're able to put together your ideas and the essence of them in a compelling way that hopefully gets other people to subscribe, to what you're doing. That obviously was a strong part of my job as an investment banker in terms of raising financing for my clients. And that was certainly something I leaned on considerably in terms of articulating what I wanted to do as a filmmaker, and putting that in a format that was conducive for people to invest in my film, not just invest in my film, but also to be a part of the film as cast members, as crew members, and various other members of the production. So I was able to, I guess, in a way, just package myself and my stories and my projects in a way that people wanted to be a part of, realizing those projects. So yeah, the investment banking experience was certainly very useful for me in that respect, and helped to compensate for the fact that I was a newbie in the filmmaking industry. I didn't really know people. I didn't know anybody at all. But just the fact that I was able to use those tools and that experience to present my projects in, what I hope was a professional manner, was certainly very helpful to me in making traction with my projects.
So fast forwarding back to now, and The Milkmaid is out. It's been, screening at festivals. Now it's going to screen with the New York African Film Festival. But it was also Nigeria's entry for the Oscars. So how do you feel? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, I know the country was very excited. I'm excited, but like, how do you feel about that? That whole process, and like, what are your hopes that may come out of it, whether you win or not?
Obviously, the Milkmaid being selected to represent Nigeria at the 93rd Oscars, yeah, I mean, to use the cliche, it's a dream come true, obviously. I mean, we have a country of 200 million people, we have a very thriving film industry, probably the most prolific film industry in the world by just sheer volume of output. And for our film to have been selected from, some very sterling competition to represent the country is extremely gratifying. It's very humbling. Absolutely, I don't think I've truly processed it yet. I think once all the various announcements have been done, and I can probably sit back and appreciate, what an honor it was or is, for us to be representing the country. But particularly for my cast and crew who really put in heart and soul into this project. We're shooting this project for 3 months in the eastern part of the country, in Taraba State, which itself is part of the theater of conflict or of insurgency. So it was certainly not without risk, but the men and the women who put their shoulders to the burden, they didn't flinch. They went through hell and high water to get this project made. They were moved by the story and the opportunity to give a voice, to those who don't have a voice to speak for themselves as victims of insurgency. So to have their efforts rewarded with such, fantastic, accolade is really, really, really very gratifying. I'm so pleased that they have this as a fruit of their endeavors. And in terms of what I expect going forward, well, we have well over 90 countries who have made submissions to the Academy with wonderful films, high quality films, and it's a very competitive process, as all the other categories, outside of Best International Feature Film are, for the Oscars. So we can only hope and pray that, hopefully, we make it, beyond the preliminary stage. Making it through to the shortlist of 15 in February would be would be even more fantastic. for us as a production, because obviously it's gratifying for us, personally and professionally, but it also helps us to meet our cardinal objective, which is for our story and for the lives of these people, involved in the insurgency, just not just in Nigeria, but increasingly, unfortunately, in sub-Saharan Africa, for the lives of these people to be seen and for their voices to be heard, for a longer period, and that will happen if the film is shortlisted. And however far it gets, both in the Oscar process as well as in the festivals that the film is showing, is just more traction, more visibility, more mileage, for the situation, and hopefully, for interventions to come on behalf of those who are affected by the insurgency. So, yeah, that's where we are. We're just hoping that our film can be seen as widely as possible, and that the people involved in these situations can get the attention that they truly deserve. Similar to what the Chibok girls got in 2014 after the abduction, but the characters we have in the Milkmaid are not necessarily of the demographic of the Chibok girls, who are young and educated. I mean, the victims of insurgency cut across men and women, young and old, and are typically not educated, similar to the lead characters of the Milkmaid. They're people just eking out an existence through farming, through cattle herding, through some form of petty trading, and their lives get disrupted by these violent activities. So, hopefully we can bring the consciousness of their stories and their lives to the world.
And I love that you mentioned like the crew, like the people behind the cameras and the whole team. Because often, like with the Oscars or just any recognition, you just know of like the filmmaker. You're like, oh, the filmmaker, the director, that's who everyone talks about. But there's a whole crew behind the scenes that make it happen. So I think it's great that you acknowledge them. And just like the imagery, like it doesn't take one person cannot do that. Like I saw like some still photos from the film and they were just amazing. And that means there's a photographer there that had to take those pictures so that that they could be shared. So it was like a whole production crew, obviously, that does it, that made it come to this point. So it was just, yeah, it was just amazing. So I have some like fun rapid fire questions for you. So my first one is about Shihu. So you have this character who wears a mask the whole time of the film. And I picked up on that. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I need to know the character development behind this because you don't tell us why in the film, but he just never removes the mask. So what's the story behind that?
The Milkmaid wasn't based on any one person's particular story. As I mentioned before, it was a product of wide research, across so many victims in several territories in the northern eastern part of Nigeria where the conflict is taking place. But quite a number of the scenarios were predicated on real life experiences narrated by survivors. And one of the accounts that I found intriguing, given by a survivor, was the fact that after being abducted, from a village and taken to the camp of insurgents, she was forcibly married to this character, who was one of the top lieutenants in the insurgency movement, but who very idiosyncratically never took off his mask. He wore his mask even to bed.
Wow.
In the bedroom, and she despite all this trauma that she was going through and faced, still found it quite intriguing that who on earth is this person that even unlike the rest of his colleagues in the movement, never took off his mask, wore his mask all the time. So I thought that would be an interesting character to portray visually in the film, even though he doesn't really say anything. But just the notion that, such was his devotion to the cause, that, he felt he needed to wear a mask all the time. Perhaps you could say he was, not entirely comfortable with what he was doing and people seeing who he was doing what he was doing. But, who knows, that's probably entering into Freudian territory here. But that's the story about the guy with the mask.
Wow. You did say like a lot of the accounts are real stories that would were told to you. So it goes back to the whole authenticity and ensuring that like kind of the voices in the storyline come out in the film. Although it's a fictional film, it's it's very true to what actually happened, which was really great. So you were filming in the north. Tell us what were either Fulani or Hausa dishes? Like what were some, because that's not where you're from. So I'm sure you tried like new foods. Was there anything that you were like, this, I love this particular thing?
What foods did I come across in the process of shooting in the north that I liked? One dish that I liked particularly happened to be one of the most common dishes, particularly for breakfast, prepared in the north. It's consumed widely and much loved. It's called fura danono, and it's essentially it's boiled or cooked millet balls crushed into a bowl of sweet yogurt. You actually see one of the characters preparing it in the film, and that was deliberate because I liked it so much. I felt I needed, people to be a part of, what I liked. But more than that, it actually is what a Fulani milkmaid sells. I mean, that's her livelihood. Apart from nono, which is milk, and which is very rich milk, which she also sells to drink. What she sells for her customers to consume to eat is actually a bowl of fura de nono. It's very delicious. I can recommend it highly to anybody who is visiting the northern part of the country or who has access to that food in some Nigerian restaurant somewhere around the world. Fura de nono is absolutely delicious. I 100% guarantee it and recommend it for consumption. The other food that I did like, there was a dish called masa. And masa effectively fried rice cakes. So they actually happen to
Nice.
look like pancakes, a bit thicker, but also very delicious. You typically eat them. They're actually made with rice mixed with, I believe, eggs as well, and it's all converted into some form of batter and fried, and it's delicious like pancakes. As I said, you eat them with some sort of broth or with gravy or with syrup. But again, absolutely fantastic, and would recommend that highly to anyone who wanted a taste of northern cuisine. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, now I'm like the next time in Nigeria, I have to go looking for those particular those two particular things. Okay, so what is your favorite film that you found inspiration from or that you just love? You can only pick one.
Only one. Wow.
That's a tough one. I will probably have to beat a well-trodden path, perhaps a bit boring because it's been heard so many times, but I'll probably have to say it's The Godfather. For me, The Godfather was, a perfect storm in terms of everything, just working, everything coming into place at a very high level of excellence. The acting, the characterizations, the story, the music, phenomenal performance by Marlon Brando, the lead character. So I mean, The Godfather for me just ticked all the boxes. It's an epic film. I like epic films. The Milkmaid isn't too short either in terms of running time. But yeah, I mean, for me, The Godfather was just a film that was very inspirational. Just in terms of fantastic writing, adapted from a very popular novel, and obviously deserves all the accolades and continuing attention that it continues to get. It's a monumental achievement in filmmaking, in my opinion, and it was certainly something that inspired me and continues to inspire me to do better in what I do.
I think I also read somewhere that you like Quentin Tarantino. Did I read that somewhere that you like Quentin Tarantino?
Yes, certainly. Quentin Tarantino's style of filmmaking is a style that I did draw some inspiration from, particularly in the context of the non-linear structure of some of his films, which we used with the Milkmaid. And
I was going to mention that because I was like, okay, I think I read that. And I noticed in the film that you do that. Like you kind of go back and forth between time. Yeah.
I guess the sense of that was we did have a lot to tell in terms of the characters, where they were going to, not just where they were going to, but where they were coming from. And we found that structure helpful to that in that regard. But also, we wanted the audience to perhaps not be spoon fed. We wanted them to perhaps work a bit for the information that they received. Hopefully, they didn't have to work too hard. If they did, I apologize for that. But yeah, that was certainly a creative decision that was inspired by some Quentin Tarantino films that I had watched.
Because there was after I watched the film, I was like, wait, I missed something. I think I missed something. So then when I went back, I was like, oh, okay, that particular time it went back and then came forward. So I had to watch it twice so I can like be like, oh, okay, now I got it. But watching it twice did not matter. Like I could probably watch it a third and fourth time because it was so good. So what are some words of wisdom that were imparted to you that kind of stick with you?
Two words come to mind that I carry around with me in filmmaking, and the first one is be positive. Never rule out what can be done. Life can be intimidating in terms of trying to limit the scope of your vision, and you can never tell what would happen. I think it's very important. I found it very important for me to remain positive, even in spite of daunting obstacles and things. And the Milkmaid for me was certainly an example of that. Several times during the course of production, wondering how on earth certain story elements are going to be achieved, and one way or the other, they were achieved. Even when one was tempted to, perhaps remove them from the script or change them or do this or that, they came through. But they only came through because somehow or the other, we endeavored to remain positive about what we were doing. So that's one. And then second thing is to be adaptive, because when the things you're trying to be positive about totally fall down flat and can't happen, then you're going to have to switch to plan B. And still, as they say, the show must continue, So just trying to be adaptive in the face of, developments that haven't worked out anywhere near the way you hope they'll work out, but still trying to remain true to the original vision, So for me personally, be positive and be adaptive.
So what would be one thing if you wanted one thing that people could take away from this film, having watched it and to leave the theater, or now that a lot of people are at home, like to once the movie has finished, what do you want them to take away from it?
Um, there are a number of things, naturally, that I'd like people to take away from watching a Milkmaid. But certainly one thing that does stand out for me is the concept of the resilience of the human spirit. And that was certainly something that I found very striking in interacting, with a couple of people who were involved in that situation, and then reading far much more about the accounts of survivors, and the fact that Africans, African women in particular, particularly in the context of this story, are extremely, amazingly resilient. I mean, so many of them could easily have had mental breakdowns, based on what they passed through, what they went through. But, through thick and thin, through hell and high water, through the storm, they're still with us to this day. Their lives are nowhere near, how they were living before they were attacked. Their lives are currently broken, currently disrupted. So certainly, economically, they are devastated, and probably to some extent emotionally and psychologically as well. But notwithstanding all that, they still push on, they still strive on, they're still looking for a foot up, or a foot back. into where they were, as human beings. And, you know, I'd like people to come away with that, with the fact that these people have been victims of insurgency, but all they need is support, and, they can recover a modicum of, what they used to be and how they used to be, but, they do need support, from the larger public. And if the public can come away with that, yes, they are victims, but their cases are not totally hopeless. There's a foundation there, emotionally and psychologically, that can be built upon with the support of the wider society. So I'd like people to come away with that from the movie. And secondly, although I know I was asked for just one thing people should take away, but as I said, I have a number of things. And another important thing for me, that people hopefully should can take away from the film is the fact that there really is not that thick a line between the perpetrators and the victims. It's really not as black and white as we'd expect, or perhaps even like to think, because the perpetrators in several cases started out as victims, and along there was a continuum that they progressed along from being victims to becoming perpetrators, facilitated by indoctrination, facilitated by brainwashing. But the fact is, it's not there's not a hard divide between the two, and victims, have become perpetrators, and perpetrators, do become victims at some point. It just reminds us of the fact that we need to be very considered in terms of how we think about the victims, how we think about the perpetrators, so that we can find the best way to engage them, because it's not that difficult for one to cross over to the other side of the line, and I think we did try to bring that out, with the Milkmaid and with the characters in the Milkmaid, which actually is based on real life events and what has actually happened. That's certainly another thing I'd like people to come away from watching the Milkmaid.
That's great. I didn't even think about that. Like, I thought a lot about Zainab and her journey, but then I didn't think about it the other way. And you just said that, like the fluidity, like it's on both sides. It's not just like one way. You'll have soldiers who come to a different understanding. Then you'll have the women who have another understanding. So that's so important and so reflective of life in general. And I think that was one of the wonderful things about The Milkmaid. Like, it was so relatable to life. Like, you saw the things you struggle with in Aisha's story. And then you can look at Dangad and understand his journey and struggling with things, because it's just part of a human process. So
an example, from The Milkmaid, obviously, is the journey of Zainab. I mean, you have here a young, sweet, innocent girl who, is not very powerful, living her life in a village. She's the younger sister, so, she even has less of a say, by virtue of her position of birth. But all of a sudden, due to the circumstances that they found themselves in, she found a path to a level of authority and power that she had never experienced in her life before. And, that was very tempting and that was very seductive, for her. And obviously was a key element in her transition, in the film, and that comes out of real life. Some of these people, the perpetrators started out as the underprivileged, the downtrodden in society, who no one, cast a second look at. And all of a sudden, by virtue of this movement, they were afforded positions of influence, of power, of authority, both male and female. And, some found that, too attractive to resist, and essentially crossed the line to become who they became. So that's again something that we sought to portray, with the film.
Yes. And evolution. I feel like the three main characters evolved in a variety of ways
Okay.
throughout the entire film. Like it wasn't like nothing was as you expected it from the beginning. It did not end as you would expect it. And it just showed you like just life, the trajectory of life. Like there's so many things that change and you end up places you never thought you would end up. And you did a really good job of like showing that journey and taking us on that journey. So thank you. Thank you, Desmond, for your time today. Amazing film. Fingers crossed for the Oscars, but even if that doesn't happen, you've put something beautiful in the world. And I think that many people will appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ngozi. Thank you very much for this interview.